are the basics in the pl-sql, like what are the basic anonymous blocks, and what are the different control structure that we have, if then else, and then how to use the different loops that we have discussed. And in the today's class, we'll talk about more on the explicit cursors and then the exceptions, and we'll go ahead with how to create a procedures and the functions. All right. So let's try to discuss more on the cursors today. So the cursors are nothing but SQL statements which are declared and managed by the programmer. So as I said yesterday, cursors are of two types. One is a implicit cursor and another is a explicit cursor. So implicit cursors, it's nothing but the memory pointers which are created within the Oracle by the Oracle server itself. You don't need to create them explicitly. Um, you don't need to create them explicitly. It will be managed by your Oracle. So explicit cursors, uh, these are actually defined by the user or a programmer and managed by the programmer or a user. Defined and managed by the user, so you can call it in this way. So defined and managed by user. And implicit cursors are, it's managed by Oracle. So Oracle database itself will create a cursor for them, and then it will do that. So as I said yesterday, all your DML statements are implicit cursors, and there is another way of using a select into clause in Oracle that is also called as a implicit cursor. And when you talk about an explicit cursor, so basically the example would be um, explicit cursors are which are defined by the user. So we are going to define them by using a cursor keyword, and we'll define them in the declaration section, and then we'll use it. So that are called as a explicit cursor. So in a simple terms, a cursor is nothing but the select statement which is associated with it. Okay. So how it is associated? So let me just show you. So when we define a cursor, so your select query will give you the set of records, and will actually loop through the set of records for performing any operation. So this is like a cursor. See, it's like a row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4 and all. So you can actually increase the memory pointer by, and you can increment the memory pointer on this. So these are like your explicit cursors. So how to define or how to manage the explicit cursor, or you can call it as a life cycle of a cursor. First, you'll define that in the declaration section with by giving one name, let's say cursor employees or something like that, and you'll open that. Open in the sense for processing it, you'll open. In order to fetch the data, I mean in order to read the data one by one row, we'll use a fetch keyword. And when you are fetching the data, if the cursor is empty, then we'll actually close it, else we'll actually loop through one by one record. So return till the no rows are found. So we'll actually keep on fetching the data till no rows are found in the database. So this is like a, you can call it as a life cycle of a cursor. So whenever you want to go for an explicit cursor, first you need to declare it, then open the cursor for accessing, and then fetch the data. If the data is you finished fetching the data, let's say your query can return a multiple record. So if it is there, so then close it. So this is like a life cycle of a cursor which you open it. So that's called as a controlling of cursors. So let's take up a program, opening a cursor, take cursor pointer one by one, and then close it once you're done with all the rows. So this is what is of controlling the explicit cursor. All right. One second. So let me just cross check. Okay. Is it better now or still it's breaking? I'm not sure whether it's a problem at my end, so I can even cross check. Yeah. Um, so this controlling of an explicit cursor. So let's take up one example and then try to print it. How it can be done in this one. Um, what is it? Okay. So here, yeah, we have everything here. Exit when is not found, and you have to close the cursor as well. So let's, yeah, this is something. Okay. So now we are actually fetching the employee ID and last name of the department ID 30, and I'm actually printing all those. So what is the employee ID and everything, and then printing it. So how do you process the, or how do you create anonymous block? So basically, I want to print the employee ID and the last name of all the department ID 30 employees. So how do you do that? See here, they're actually taking a record type. So we are not going ahead with the record type. I mean, forget about it. So yesterday when I have said scalar data types are something that for a if you are storing only one variable, one value in a variable, that is called as a scalar data type. If you are storing a multiple values or a group of attributes, then that's called as a record type or an object. So your pl-sql also supports object oriented programming just like your Java. So here we are not going ahead with, I mean, I'm not going in details about how to use a composite data type, but rather I'll just show you how it will work. See, basically, if you see this declaration, it just says that as v underscore employee record, and this c underscore employee is a cursor, what you have defined on the above, and you're just giving it as percentage row type. So there are two ways of declaring the variables. So one is called as a percentage type variable, and another is called as a percentage row type. Percentage row type. So what is the difference between a percentage type and a percentage row type? Let's understand. See, if I define a variable something like v underscore salary, and wherein the, when I'm defining a variable, if I'm giving something like this, employee dot salary percentage type. So what does that mean is, it will assign the data type of the salary column to this variable, that is your v underscore salary variable. So that is the meaning of this one. So whatever the data type that you have defined at the table level, so the same data type will be assigned to this. So that is called as a percentage type. Let's say if I define something like this, let's say employee underscore record. So whereas if I define employee percentage row type, so if I define something like this, so what happens is that whatever the attributes that you have in the employee table, so all the attributes are applied to this. In the sense, let's say in my employee table, I have a columns like employee ID, first name, last name, salary, and all those things. So all the attributes will be assigned to this record type. So how do you access one by one when you define like this? See, if I want to access the first name, so we'll use this one. So employee underscore record dot first name. So if you want to access the last name, we'll access like this, employee underscore record dot last name. So like this, if you want to access the individual attributes, you can do that by using this. So that is the difference between a row type and the percentage type. So it's always advantageous to create, I mean, define or declare the variables by using a percentage type and percentage row type, because um, in case if your salary variable, I mean salary column data type is changing, you don't need to modify in your program. Okay, so this way you can define a percentage type and percentage row type. Percentage row type means it's a group of attributes, it's not a single attribute. So do remember, it's a group of attributes or group of columns you can call. And percentage type is used for a single column. So whenever you want to define for a single column, that we will use for a single column. So how do you access this, or how do you define that in this? Um, like now, let's say, let's try to print this as we discussed. Like we'll try to print the employee ID and the last name of the employees who belongs to 30 department. So in a way, we will understand here how to use a percentage row type, and at the same time how to use the cursor. How to use the cursor, explicit cursor, that will discuss. So my example would, basically it has to print the last name and the salary of uh, the employees who are belongs to department number 30. So that is my requirement. So let me define this here. So cursor, let's say, and spelling is this cursor. So how to define this? You need to give the name for it. So maybe most of the time, so we'll call it as cur underscore get emp get employee. So whatever is. So you need to write a query. So till this, you'll just write cursor is, and then you can write a query here. So which states that select the last name and then the salary from, let's say, employees. Uh, let's say I want to determine something like this where department ID is equal to, let's say, 30. So this you have last name and the salary from employees where department ID is equal to 30. So this is my cursor. Now I need two variables to capture the last name and the salary. So either I can define something like this. So let me just show you. This is like a scalar data types, v underscore salary. So I can use it as employees. I think what is the table name here? Uh, employees, right? So employees dot salary and percentage type. So this is one, and I can even define like this. Let's say v underscore last name. I can define the variable. See, till yesterday, how we have defined the variables, we have actually defined by using a actual data type. But here, I'm not using like that. So last name and then the percentage type. So this is your V salary and then the V last name. That is what you have. Now, I'm going to uh, loop through it and then I can capture it. So I'll show you two ways of declaring the variables. Now we are going by the scalar data type. So now I need to define a cursor. See, the cursor can be accessed in two ways. One is by using a for loop, another is by using a basic loop. Yesterday we have seen basic loop, right? Loop, end loop, and then you have used an exit statement and all. You can use a basic loop and all. See, what is the life cycle of a cursor? First, you need to declare it. We have done that. And next one is to open the cursor. So let's say open the cursor and cursor underscore get employee. So get. So we have opened the cursor and then we need to loop through the cursor. Loop in the sense, so see, obviously your cursor will give multiple records, right? So in order to process the multiple records, you need to loop through it. So now we have opened the cursor, we are looping through the cursor, and at the end, when you come out of the loop, so I want to close the cursor. So in between, once you open and then when you are going through the loop, you need to actually fetch the data. So see, when you execute this query, obviously it will give you some 10 to 15 records, right? So this record, 6 records it has given. So you need to process 6 records one by one. So how do you do that? So let's say you have the option as fetch. What data you are fetching? Actually, you are fetching the data from the cursor. So fetch cursor into what variables. So you need to specify. Basically, this is returning you two values, right? Last name and the salary. So first value is the last name and the second value is the salary. So you need to also define the values. Uh, you need to also define the values in a proper way. So first one is a last name and another is a salary. And now it needs to come out. See, whenever it is fetching the data, whenever it will not find the data. See, when you go back in a example wherein if you see the cursor processing, see here it is fetching one by one cursor. So it is fetching a row. Once it fetches all the rows from the cursor pointer, you have to close the cursor. I mean, when should it come out of your loop? It should come out of your loop whenever it doesn't find the value in a cursor, or whenever it doesn't find the row. Exit when. So this is a cursor. So there are some attributes which are associated with the cursor called as a not found attribute, is open, is closed, all these kind of an attribute. So here I'm using a not found attribute. Okay, so if I say, what does it mean is exit when cursor get employee dot percentage not found. That means whenever there is no record found in this, just come out of the loop. That's what you're saying. So what are the cursor attributes? Let's take down here. Okay, so once you are here, so you need to know the cursor attributes. So first one is a percentage found. So percentage found returns true whenever it will find a record in the cursor. True returns true when it finds a record in cursor. When it finds a record in cursor. And percentage not found returns true. Percentage not found returns true when when there are no records in the cursor. When cursor is empty. So cursor is empty. And there is another one called as a percentage is open. Percentage is open. So this is another attribute from the cursor. So it returns returns true if the cursor is opened in the memory. Returns true if the cursor is open in a memory. So if it is there, so that's what it is there. So this is how we can define the cursor and then the cursor attributes which you have. Now when I use this exit when percentage not found, that means whenever it will not find a record, it will basically come out of the loop. So that is what is the meaning. Now I have to print all these values in a cursor. So basically I have to print it. So this thing, so I'm using a dbms statement, dbms underscore output dot put underscore line, dbms dot put underscore line. So what are the values that you want to print? I want to print both the last name as well as a salary. So let's say v underscore last name, let's say salary is, so there is a space which I require here, salary is v underscore salary. So if you try to define this, basically it will just print king salary is 1000, coacher salary is 10,000, like that it will print. I'm using an exit statement and I'm just coming out of the loop and then printing it. So this is what it is. So when you try to run this is anonymous block from the 25th row to this. So this is my anonymous block. So when I try to execute, it basically has to print all the values. See here, anonymous block execution is completed. So Rafael salary is 11,000, Ku salary is 3,100 by the, so Tobias and all. So this is how you can process the multiple records using the cursor. So this cursor is basically helps you to process multiple times. This is a basic loop. See here, since you are fetching the two records, you have actually defined the two variables and you are catching those two variables. See, if you are using the salary first and the last name second, it will throw the error because first value you are fetching here as a last name and the second value as a salary. So because the data type is wrong, so it will throw the error when you try to define it. So this is by using a scalar variable. Same program you can also write by using a percentage row type attribute. Row type is nothing but the group of attributes. So how do you define this? So let's say instead of declaring this variable as a salary and the last name. So you can declare it as v underscore employee record. So this is like a record type which we are defining. So either you can define all the attributes which are part of employees, or I can define a variable which is of cursor type. Cursor means how many records you are fetching in the cursor. So I mean how many columns. So two columns. So it will give you the two columns here. So cursor get percentage of row type which it is there. So cursor get employee percentage row type. So which it is there. Now basically here, so if you observe closely and concentrate here, instead of using two values, I'll just go and specify only one value, which means the two columns which you are fetching will be assigned to same thing. So how does your employee underscore record will store the values? It will store something like this. Let's say Q 3100, 3100. So both the values are stored. Now, how are you going to access? So this is in a way it will store something like this. Based on the column name it will store. One is a last name and another is a, so this is like a salary. So this is called as a record type. At a time your record type can capture how many records? Only one row. It cannot capture more than one row because it is not a collection, right? It is a just a row type. Row type means only one single row it can capture. So if you go for a collections, then you can have a multiple values. So now here, in order to access that last name and everything, so instead of using this v underscore employee record dot last name, and here for accessing this you are going to use it as v underscore employee record dot salary. So here what is happening? So you've just defined only one composite data type. Composite data type is nothing but one record type, and you're just accessing that. So when you try to execute, it's the same logic again. So it will just give you the same result. So earlier you have done it by using multiple declarations here. One is a salary and then the record. Here you just define that as a record type. So this is called as a record or an object, or you can call it as a composite data type. Why it is called as a composite data type? If you see, this is actually handling the varchar data as well as a number data both. So salary is a number and then the last name is a varchar, both the values. So can I store only two values in the record type? No, you can have n number of columns. You can have a date column. So I can even define this another way of declaring. Suppose if you want to capture all the attributes from the employees table, so I can even define something like this: employees of percentage row type. So if I define like this, what does that mean? It will have all the attributes from the employee table. If the employee table is having some 11 columns, for all the 11 columns it will have that. So that's how this is record type can be declared. And this is like a uh, basic cursor, like a basic loop, how we can use. So when you are using a basic loop, you must write this statement: exit when cursor percentage not found. That means you are actually telling a pl-sql engine that whenever you don't find a value in the cursor memory, so just come out of the loop and then close the cursor. That's what we are doing here. So close and then cursor underscore get emp. So that's how you can define this by using. So you can also use the cursor by using a for loop. So let's try to use the same example with the for loop this time. So for loop, when you are using it, you don't need to close the cursor, you don't need to open the cursor. Directly you can access this. So if it is the same thing, uh, you don't need even the record type also. You can directly declare a memory pointer directly inside a for loop itself. Counter variable also you can define. So now let's say, how do you define the for loop? Let's say for employee underscore record, or anything, any name you can give, counter name, and then just give the cursor name here. For employee underscore record in cursor, and then loop through it. So if you are using a for loop, the advantage is that you don't need to loop, you don't need to open it, you don't need to close it, you don't need to fetch the data and all. So directly it will take care of all the operations. And then now if I want to print it, So I don't need to use exit statement and all, not required. So I don't need even a counter also. So here employee underscore record dot last name. So if you use last name, it will give you the last name, and then the same thing, this will give you the salary. Now this is how you print it. It's a simple way of declaring. You don't need to open, close, fetch, all these things and all not required. So it's also prints the same way. So this is how you can define a for loop cursor. One is by using a open fetch basic loop cursor, and another is by using this. So this is more about the different types of cursors. So how we use the cursors in the pl-sql programming. All right. Okay. So the next topic is about the handling the exceptions. So what do you mean by an exception? See, exception is nothing but, undefined error, or at the runtime, the error which you're not capturing, that's called as an exception. So exception sort of different types. You have predefined exceptions, and another is called as a user-defined exceptions. So predefined exceptions means which whenever there are some Oracle error, then that Oracle error will be raised by your pl-sql engine, and that is called as a predefined. A non-predefined uh, user defined is something that where based on some business validations will only raise the exception and then do it. So always we'll define the exceptions in the exception section. So it's a part of an execution block. So far we have not written any exception here. So if this is, we will do this. So now let's try to understand what do you mean by an exception first of all. Okay. So let's say I just want to print a name of an employee whose employee ID is equal to 1000. So I just want to print it. So or whose department ID is equal to this one. So let's say if you call this on as I'm using a select statement, let's say I need even one declaration block. One is called as a v last name, and this I'm defining it as employees dot last name percentage type. So this is what I'm using. So I have this one now. So let's say you have a I want to fetch the last name of an employee who's this is a query. So I have this one. So select last name. So there is a select into statement which we'll use in the pl-sql. So for fetching only one record, it is useful. If you are fetching more than one record, it will throw the error. From, let's say, employees. So from employees, where let's say the department ID is equal to department ID is equal to 30. So this is what is it is. See, I know that department ID, if I use it as 30, it will give me more than one record. But your select into clause can be used only to fetch only one record at a time. So what kind of exception you will get it now? So if you try to execute at this is not a compilation error. This is actually a runtime error. Error thrown by your Oracle engine or a pl-sql engine at the runtime is called as an exception. So when you see this, so this is an exception. See here, exact fetch returns more than the requested number of rows. So when you're using a select into clause, you can handle only one. See, basically now this query is returning more than one row, and you're trying to assign the multiple rows to a single value a variable. So that's why it is throwing the error. So this is called as an exception. So at the runtime, your unexpected error is called as an exception. So this is called as an exception. So if you see, exact fetch returns more than one rows. Now let's say we'll see in the another type of thing. Let's say I know that there is no department called as a 9999. So if you try to see this, it will throw the error. See here, it is trying to fetch the data and then it is throwing the error as no data found. That means your query is not returning any data. So it is not finding any data through your query. That is also one more exception. So these are all called as exceptions which are raised by the Oracle. So that's called as a predefined exception. User defined exception means I'll tell you, like you have to define them and then get it. So whenever you are handling the exceptions, so always the exceptions should be handled in this way. So first you need to define all the predefined exception, and at last you should have a others block. So in the sense, when you are defining a, okay, let's take up an example and then, okay. So guidelines for processing the exception is always that whenever you use any type of an exception, always when other should be in the last in the clause. Because I'll tell you maybe once we write a specific example here. These are all the some predefined exception. No data found means whenever you are fetching the data and if your query is not returning anything, that is called as a no data found exception. Too many rows exception we have seen. It's like if a query is returning more than one row and you are using a select into clause, that is a too many rows exception. Invalid cursor. Invalid cursor means you have defined a cursor as C1 and you are trying to access the cursor C2. So which is not defined in the declaration section. That time it will throw the error as invalid cursor. So 0 by divide, it's a normal thing. So whenever you are trying to divide by the 0, this exception will occur. And duplicate value on an index. So when it will, this type of an error exception will occur whenever you are trying to insert a duplicate record into a primary key column or a unique key column. So this error will occur. So these are all some predefined exceptions which you can call no data found, too many rows, or you can call it as a very frequent exceptions which you get. So these are the predefined. So you have so many, but these are not being listed over here. So predefined exceptions. So these are all the predefined exceptions for you. Duplicate value on index and all those things. Now, so these are all some more. So, but let's not go in detail about it. Now, user defined exceptions. So we'll come back to that. Uh, Whenever you want to capture the error that is associated with the exception on the error code, you need to understand two variables. One is called as a SQL code, which will returns the numeric value of the error code, and SQL ERRM will give you the message. See, if I want to understand some exception has happened, I don't know what is that exception. If I want to understand what is the error code and what is a error message, so you need to use this. SQL code is nothing but the Oracle code, and SQL ERRM is nothing but the Oracle error message. Error message, what it is there. So SQL code is nothing but the Oracle. See, every error in Oracle is associated with one code or number. So that is nothing but Oracle error number. So which it is associated with. So SQL code and the SQL ERRM. So this is more on the this part. So let's try to understand how this exception handling works. All right. So this is trapping the user defined exception. So I just want to show you first of all how can we capture the exception, and then we'll go back to that. Okay, so now let's try to first define the one exception with this. So let's take up the same example. So I'm passing the department ID. So if it returns more than one row, then it has to print the message as too many rows. And if it does not finds the department ID, it should print in a different way. So how do you capture the exceptions? So always in the execution block, you should start with the exception keyword, and whatever you write between the exception to end, this is your exception block. So whenever you are writing, first you need to use the all the predefined exceptions. So what are the predefined exceptions? Let's say when no data found. So I'm writing something like this. Whenever no data found means whenever this is evaluated to true, what you should do. So I want to just print a message as dbms output. So dbms output dot put underscore line. So there is no department with the department ID. So let's say I call this as another department ID. So which I call it as, let's say, V department ID and then the number of, let's say, 999. And instead of using the direct hard coded value, I'm just replacing that by department ID. So here I want to print a message. There is no department exist. There is no department. There is no department ID or something like this. There is no department ID. V underscore department ID exists in this. Exists in this. So this is, there is no department ID with this. In a way, let's say you have another error. So it might be the case that there might be too many rows, means it might return more than some. So too many rows, then I want to print a message as this one. So let's say there are more than one employee in this department. There are more than one employee in this department which it is existing. So now I'm writing this one. So in case of any other error, so if it is returning more than one record, I want to print this message. And if it is not returning any record, I want to print this message. And in case of any other error, in case if it is returning other than these two errors, when others, then so you're going to print this. So dbms output dot put underscore line. Let's say when others, so what will it happen? So I want to print the message as SQL ERRM. So what does that SQL ERRM? It's associated with a Oracle error message, and I want to print the SQL code as well. So SQL code and SQL ERRM, I just want to print as part of this your buffer. So SQL code, so which it is there. So now I'm passing 999. So we know that there is no department 999 exist. So it will raise the exception. So earlier what happened is that if you see this one, wherein I do not have the exception handle, at the runtime it is throwing the error saying that no data found. It is a undefined exception. That's why it is runtime. It is stopping your program. It is not executing your program. It is not completing your program. It is just stopping. Whenever it finds it, it will just coming out of the loop. Now see, whenever there is an exception, first your pl-sql engine will go and check inside the exception block. If it finds the suitable handler for that exception, it will execute the a block which you have defined, else it will come out of the loop. So whenever there is an exception which happens, first it will go on checking from top to bottom. So first it will check if there is a no data found exception, it will execute it and then come out of the execution block. Otherwise it will go on checking one by one from top to bottom. So that's the reason always when others should be at the last. Why? Because if you are defining a when others here, what will happen? If this is evaluated to true, it will not execute these exceptions. So that's the reason always you should define the when others in the last. Does your compiler throws the error if I am defining the when others block here? Yes. It's a compilation error. It will give you the compilation error. So you cannot keep when others before that. See here. Others handler must be last among the exception in the handlers block. This is not an exception. This is actually the compilation error. So it will give you the compilation error if you are keeping the when others block first in the exception. So all right, so this is more about the this is more on the this part. So let's try to use how it works. See, now I'm passing the department ID as 999. So when I try to execute this one, so when you execute this, it is saying that there is no department 999 exist. So it is not returning me an Oracle error saying that no data found and all. So it is not returning me. So whenever you want to capture the error, so this is how you can do that. So now what is happening? Your this exception block is executed and then it is printing me the message as 99. So let's say if I pass the department ID as 20, obviously this department ID will return more than one record. So it will return a too many rows exception and it has to print this message for me. So let's try to define this one. So it is basically returning me the message as there are more than one employee in the department 20. So this is what it is returning. In case of any other errors in the sense, suppose let's say I'm defining the number as number of 1 and I'm assigning the value as 20. See here, you are defined it as number of 1 but I'm assigning a 2-digit value. That's an exception, right? So at the runtime it will throw the exception. See here, that's another error. See, it is not a no data found exception. It is not a too many rows exception. It is raising some other exception which it is there. When you try to print it, see, it has print the error as numeric overflow error. Number precision is too large. One second. Is it printing at line 3? Okay. So it's basically giving me the compilation error. It's not the runtime error. Let's try to check that one second, whether it is printing this message or not. Error message, and you have it as error code. So let's try to check this, whether it is printing me the compilation error or a runtime error. If it is a compilation error, let's try to understand in a different way. Yeah, it's a compilation error. It's not a runtime error. It's basically the it is while compiling the program itself it is throwing the error. So let's define it as number of 2 and let's try to handle it in a different way. Okay, let me show you what do you mean by the, see, any unhandled exception is called as a it will get executed with others block. So I just want to see which department has the only one employee, and that, okay, so I think the department 10 has only one employee. So let me just try to use it. Okay, see, the department 10 has only one employee and the employee last name is actually of 5 characters, right? So it's actually of 5 or 6 characters. Okay, now here I'll define the employee last name as varchar 2 of varchar 2 of 2. I'm just defining it as varchar 2 of 2. That means maximum it can handle only 2 characters, not more than that. But if you see, I'm assigning the, if I use 10 here, this will get executed where department ID is equal to 10. And when you assign the last name is of 6 characters, and 6 characters you're trying to assign it to the two character variable you are assigning. Obviously this will throw an exception, right? So it will throw it. So when you try to do that, which one it is getting executed? See, now anonymous block is completed. That is not a compilation error. See, it is throwing this error this time. Numeric or value error, character string buffer is too small. That is an exception. We didn't handle that exception here. That's why it is executing the when others block. So when others block is always the last one to get executed. So last one. So whenever you are defining, first define all the possible exceptions of your program and then keep when others block in the last. So these are all like a predefined exceptions. We didn't talk about any user defined exception. Predefined exceptions are this one. User defined exception means, suppose let's say now it is a programmatical errors you are capturing. Suppose let's say user is actually inputting a PAN card number they are passing, and you know that PAN card number must be of 10 digits, 10 characters. If it is less than 10 characters, that's an invalid PAN card number. So you have to raise the business exception saying that whoever enters the value as PAN card number which is less than 10 characters or more than 10 characters, then that's an invalid PAN card. I have to raise the exception in a program saying that that's a business message. Like if I want to raise that kind of a, then we'll go for a user defined exception. So how do you raise the user defined exception? That is by using a method which a pl-sql provides, that is called as a rise application error. So this is a method that we use, which we define, that is called as a rise application error. So this one we'll try to use it now. So how to use the user defined exception? See, we'll define one thing. Okay, first we'll define a exception, and we'll check whether the PAN card number, length of the PAN card is not equal to 10 characters. Then we'll raise the exception for it. We'll raise the exception and then handle it. So how do you do that? So either you can raise the exception in the when others block, or this one. Okay, let's try to build a program so that it will give you the better comfort in understanding that. So user defined exception always should be defined in the, so now let's say declare and then the begin. So this is, let's say, nothing but vpan number. So pan number is of mixed characters, so you can give it as varchar2 of some 100, and this value I'm just passing this as a let's say ALBPR 8627 AAA. So this is more than 10 characters. So if you count it, it's more than 10 characters. Now my requirement is that to understand how does a user defined exception works. So whenever you want to define a user defined exception, so you need to first define that in the, declare that in the declaration block. So this is a invalid pan. I'm defining the type as exception. So if you see this, it's basically, it will raise the invalid PAN card number. So it will raise the exception as invalid PAN. So now let's try to build it. Here I'm checking the condition. So if length of V PAN card number is not equal to 10, then end if. So basically whenever this happens, that's an invalid PAN card number. So I have to raise the exception saying that raise is a keyword to raise the user defined exception. So raise the keyword and then use the message as raise underscore invalid PAN. So now what it will do is this, it will raise the exception saying that invalid PAN card number. So that exception should be handled inside your exception block. So directly without, say you're raising the exception and you're not handling that exception, it will throw the error. This is a compilation error itself. This is a compilation error. See, unhandled user defined exception. You are raising the exception, but for this you don't have any block defined in your exception block. That's why it is throwing the compilation error. It's not a runtime error. So if you see this, when, let's say now whenever there is a invalid PAN card number, then so I need to print a message saying that the user has inputted an invalid PAN card number. I want to print something like that. So dbms output dot dbms output dot put underscore line, let's say user has inputted a invalid PAN card number, invalid PAN number. So this is what, which it is there. So likewise we can define this. So when you try to do this, this is like a user defined error. Now it is printing, see, user has inputted an invalid PAN card number. So this is how you can raise it. So once you capture the user defined exception, it might be the case that it might even throw the some other error other than this error. So for that you can handle that by using a when others block. See, always whenever you write a program, when others exception should be there. Some or the other error will rise. So for that we will define the SQL ERRM and the SQL code. So you need to memorize these two things. SQL ERRM will give you the error message and SQL code will give you the Oracle error code. So whatever the code that is associated with that error, that it will give you. So error message is, so this is what it will throw. So this is more about the handling of exceptions inside the your pl-sql. So this is like a user defined exception. See, basically now what is the meaning is that you're raising an exception and you're just printing it. You're just printing that message. Now, see, your PL/SQL program can be invoked from n number of places. You can invoke the PL/SQL program from Informatica. You can invoke the PL/SQL program from your Java program, or you can invoke from .NET, anywhere else. You can call it from anywhere. So suppose now there is a, you're actually calling a program, and that message, whatever the exception message is there, that you want to return it back to your calling method, in the sense the program which is calling your procedure. So it's like, now what I'm saying is, let's say there is a requirement, so you need to understand this one. So let's say I have a Java method, okay, Java program is there, wherein uh, here you're actually registering in the income tax website, I mean income tax site, you're registering it. So when you're registering, you are actually inputted a PAN card number. So you just entered 11 characters as a PAN card number. Now, when you go and see, it will throw the message saying that invalid PAN card number, right? So now assume that this Java program is actually calling a pl-sql program, which is there in the backend. Okay, so you're calling this Oracle procedure, Oracle pl-sql procedure. It is tried to insert the data. When it is inserting the data, it found that PAN card is an invalid. Now, when you raise the exception, you're raising an exception saying that invalid PAN card number, but that should reach the user, right? That should reach the business user saying that this is an invalid PAN card number. Then only they'll understand that, okay, I have entered the invalid PAN card number, so I have to correct it. So if they are not understanding and your pl-sql program is not properly throwing the error message to the business user, they'll get confused. So in order to propagate the error message from your called method to the calling method, there are two things. One is this is a calling method, and this is a invoking. I mean, it is actually invoking the other method. So you're raising the exception here in Oracle, and that should reach to your Java program saying that you have raised an error. Otherwise, your Java program cannot understand there is an error which has happened in your Oracle database, right? So if you have to propagate this error message back to your Java, if you're just raising it and then printing in the console, it will not reach. You're just printing in the console, your Java cannot understand that, okay, you're printing the message as error message is this one, so I have to understand that this is error. So this is something which is happening in your Oracle database, but it is not reaching. So how can I propagate this message to the Oracle database? For that, Oracle has given you one method to propagate the error message back to the calling method, that is called as a rise application error. So this is a method that you use for sending the message back to this. So this is a method that we use that is called as a rise application error. See, now whenever there is an invalid PAN card number, it should not print it. It should actually send back the message back to my this one. So how do you define this program? So this is a user defined error. I'm still accepting it, but I don't want to print it. Rather, I want to send a message to that. So when you try to do this, here invalid PAN card number, instead of actually inputting it, so we will write it as rise an application error method. Basically takes two arguments. So this is a method, or you can call it as a procedure to rise your error. So this is your rise application error. It will take two arguments. One is a error code, and another is a error message. So see, basically this error code should be from minus 20,000 to I think 20,999. If it is more than that or less than that, it will not accept, because all the other error codes are resolved by your Oracle. So you cannot raise the exception basically which is other than that value. So if you see the rise application error method, not this one. Yeah. So the rise application error method, so you have to use the error number and then the message. So what are the numbers? You have to use it from minus 20,000 to minus 20,999. If you are giving a error code other than this number, it will throw the error because all the other error codes are reserved by Oracle. See, I'm telling you, like, every error message in Oracle is associated with one code. So they've actually defined it. Okay, so looking at the code, I can understand what is this error. So every Oracle error exception or a message, error message will contain the code as well as the this one. So whenever you are raising the user defined exception, you should always use the numbers from minus 20,000 to minus 20,999. If you're using other than this number, it will throw the error. Okay, so that should be from that. So now that's why I've given as minus 20,001. So this is not minus, it's actually hyphen, I think. So let's try to do this. This time it will not print it, rather it will rise this error message saying that invalid PAN card number. So the rise application error is a method which we follow. So see here. Why? Okay. So it is printing it, this one. So it is printing this, and see the Oracle error code. What it is printing? Aura 20,001. This is your user defined error code what you have passed. So that is how you can rise an application error. Rise application error is you can use this procedure to issue the user defined error messages from your stored programs. You can report errors to your application and avoid the returning unhandled exception. So this is a method that we use for rising the exception back to your sub programs in case if you're calling anything. Sub program means it's like one program is calling the other program. That's called as a sub program. Here this is called as a main program and this is called as a sub program. It is also possible that one program P1 can call the program P2. So let's say you have program P1 and there is another program P2 which you have, which you're calling from this. Let's say I'm calling the P2 program from P1 and you're raising the exception here, and that exception should propagate back to your P1 program. So if it has to propagate back, then you need to use a rise application error. Otherwise, that error will get vanished here within this itself. So that is the use of your rise application error method, wherein you can use this to handle the unhandled exception by this one. So this is pretty much about your exceptions. So how to handle this? See, so far we discussed about the very basic level of pl-sql programming, how to define the cursors and then the exceptions. And tomorrow we'll talk about actual stored programs. Stored program in the sense which will get saved in the database. See, whenever I'm compiling this program or whenever I'm executing this program, is this program is getting saved somewhere? No. This is an unnamed block. It is not getting saved anywhere. So this is an unnamed block. So this is called as a this one, or you can call this one as an anonymous block. So tomorrow we'll talk about the two important things. One is called as a procedure. So how do you define procedures in the pl-sql, and how do you define functions in the pl-sql, and what is the difference? And we'll talk about the packages, and next one we'll talk about the dynamic SQL. So you need to brush up all these concepts what we have discussed so far. Unless you understand all these things, you'll not be able to write the procedures and functions and the packages. So that's why we're not going to discuss about the triggers, and as a data warehousing developer or an Informatica developer, you're not going to define the triggers in it. So I'm not going to talk about it anyway. So we'll talk about procedures and functions, and then the packages and how to use a dynamic SQL and all. So this, whatever we have discussed so far, I'm leaving it early because so I want you to understand all of the concepts what we have discussed, and we are going to use a similar concepts when you're defining the procedure and all. Similar concepts we are going to define. So these things tomorrow I'm going to take for 1.5 hour session, if probably maybe a little more than that. So we have to cover all these things at a time, and then we'll move on with Informatica, I mean stored procedure transformation. So to understand the stored procedures, we are discussing about all these. All right. So that's pretty much I have for the day. Um, we'll talk about this one little later because I have to change in the times. We will probably understand maybe after this tomorrow's class. I'm not sure. Still, the uh, organizing team has informed me about it, so I'll just check with them and then I'll confirm you. Okay. All right. So I'm closing the meeting for now. Thanks. Suresh, to get the last details about the last SQL call, I think probably I have to think about it. I'm not very sure whether we can get the last
I
SQL.
think no, actually we have SQL right? Like DB2 like the same like that we have in Oracle also, like to get the how many records is updated in the last call. Like
That
we will
one
be
you can
pulling out from
understand
the.
by using a row count in Oracle. So there is something called as your cursors are
Okay.
actually associated with attributes like a row count, all those things.
Okay.
So if you want to understand how
Okay.
many records are inserted or updated, then you can use SQL percentage row count. So that will give you that. So I'll show you
Okay.
now. 1 second, I'll show
Yeah.
you that.
Okay. We have actually ERR SQL ERR will be there. That if the ERC third occurrence of ERR will give you the number of rows affected on a last SQL call.
Okay, so now I'll show you in Oracle we can actually have handle it by using the different way. Suppose let's say I have this one, so declare and or we can just write a begin. I'm just using an implicit cursor here, begin and end. Let's say I'm updating the statement, something like let's say update employees set salary is equal to salary. That's what I'm doing. And if you just want to know how many rows are being updated by your last SQL statement, you can probably use something like this. So dbms output dot put underscore line. So implicit cursors are always can be accessed by using this SQL percentage row count. So if I use SQL percentage row count in this, now what it will do is, so it will basically print me how many number of rows are affected by my last SQL statement. See, it has given me 108. So that means it has basically updated a 108 rows by using that.
Okay.
So that's how it works.
Okay. Okay.
So this is called as an SQL percentage row count. So let's say if you want to capture that the same kind of an information using your actual user-defined exception. This is, I mean, user-defined cursor. This is like a implicit cursor what I have defined. If you want to know about the explicit cursor, that also can be identified. Let's say we go for this example. If I want to know how many number of records are returned by this, so here let's say if I want to print the error row count, how many rows are affected by last this thing, it will actually give me the row counter row counter number. See, your SQL cursor, explicit cursor is like a group of multiple records, right? So if I want to know employee record of percentage row count, this row count is like a memory pointer. It will vary from 1 to the maximum number. So when I try to execute this, it will start printing the numbers from 1, 2, 3. So let's comment this part for now and try to check this. So if you try to execute this, oops. So when you try to run this program, so this, if you try to handle this one, now if you check this one, so it started printing from 1, 2, 3, 4. It just incremented counter. So for which record it is pointing to. First 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if it is having 1000 records, that counter will get incremented. This is with respect to the user defined cursors. If it is with respect to the implicit cursors, it will always give you the number of rows affected by that cursor. So that's what, if you use SQL percentage row count, it will give you that value.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much.
I forget. I thought of asking one more question. I forget it. Okay. Karthik, same like other databases, like whenever we open a cursor, like it will fetch all the details to a resultant table. In Oracle also, it will do the same thing. I mean, the SQL engine also.
Resultant table, yeah. Whenever you open a cursor, it will just
Yeah.
create a
Okay.
pointer and then
Yeah. Okay.
start accessing it. Yes.
Okay. 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 Got it.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye. So any other questions before we close?